Good morning, everyone. I'm here to talk about other asset price channels. In this report, we will examine the transmission mechanisms of monetary policy and evaluate the empirical evidence on them to better understand the role that monetary policy plays in the economy. In addition to bond prices, there are two other asset prices receive substantial attention as channels for monetary policy effects, which are the foreign exchange rate and the price of equities or stock. So, sa nako ni na-add, in addition to bond prices, napako ni duha ka asset prices that will receive ay substantial attention as channels for monetary policy. Mo na lagi tong foreign exchange rates and the price of equities or stock. So first, we will tackle about the foreign exchange rates. So an exchange rate effects on net imports. With the growing internationalization of economies throughout the world and the advent of flexible exchange rates, more attention has paid to how monetary policy affects exchange rates, which in turn affect the net exports and aggregate demand. So diri sa exchange rate effects on net imports, atong tan-awon kung unsay effect sa exchange rate ato sa net exports at the same time effect po niya sa aggregate demand. So when domestic real interest rates fall, the domestic dollar assets become less attractive to assets denominated in foreign currencies. So as a result, the value of dollar assets relative to other currency assets falls and the dollar depreciates. So, kung ang domestic real interest rates kung umuobos, that means ang domestic dollar currency or domestic dollar asset is less attractive na siya. So, tungod ingana, ang domestic dollar or ang dollar asset is muobos. The lower value of domestic currency makes domestic goods cheaper than foreign goods, thereby causing a rise in net exports and hence in aggregate demand. The schematic for the monetary transmission mechanisms that operates through the exchange rate is R, then down, and then sa E1, which is denoted by the dollar depreciation, and then NX, which is the net exports, to Y, which is the aggregate demand. So, kung moubos ang real interest, domestic real interest rate, so it means ang dollar mo depreciate. When the dollar depreciates, it means that the domestic goods are cheaper, making it nga motaas jud ang net exports. So, ug motaas ang net exports, that means nga ni-increase pod ang aggregate demand. So the schematic for the monetary transmission mechanism that operates through the exchange rate is mao na lang itong R down to E1, which is denoted by katong the depreciation of the domestic dollar, and then to NX, which is the net exports, and then Y, which is the aggregate demand. So the second is Tobin's Q theory. Nobel Prize winner James Tobin developed a theory referred to as Tobin's Q theory, which explains how monetary policy can affect the economy through its effect on the valuation of equities or stock. So sa dire, sa kaning Tobin's Q theory, i-explain ni James Tobin unsaon kuno sa monetary policy pag-affect sa economy through sa valuation sa equities or stock. So, gidefine ni Tobin ang Q as the market value of firms divided by the replacement cost of capital. If Q is high, the market price of firms is high relative to the replacement cost of capital, and new plant and equipment capital is cheap relative to the market value of firms. So, if taas kuno ang Q, which is the market value of firms divided by the replacement cost of capital, ang market price kuno sa firms is taas relative sa iyang replacement cost. So, ug taas, that means nga new plant ug equipment cheap na laman na siya. So that means that companies can then issue stock and get a high price for it relative to the cost of the facilities and equipment they are buying. So the investment spending will then rise because firms can now buy a lot of new investment goods with only small issue of stock. Conversely put, when the queue is low, firms will not purchase new investment goods because the market value of firms is low relative to the cost of capital. So kung low, di sila mo palit o bagong investment goods kay ang market value sa firm is ubos man. The Tobin-Skew theory gives good explanation for the extremely low rate of investment spending during the Great Depression, wherein in that period the stock prices collapsed, and by 1933 stocks were worth only 1/10 of their value in 1929, wherein the Q fell to unprecedented low levels. Quite simply, lower real interest rates on bonds mean that expected return on this alternative to stocks fall. So kung ubos kuno ang imong interest rates sa bonds, meaning ang imong expected nga return is ubos pod, which makes the stocks more attractive relative to bonds. So the demand for them increases and raises their price. Combining this with the fact that higher stock prices, which is P, denoted by P, kung taas ang stock prices, mulid na siya og higher Q, and thus a higher investment spending, which is denoted by L, leads to the following transmission mechanisms of monetary policy. So kung ubos ang real interest rates nimo sa bonds, it means nga mutaas ang kanang stock prices. Ug mutaas ang stock prices, mutaas pod ang imong Q. And thus, a higher Q mulid pod siya og higher investment spending. Unya, og higher investment spending, it means that napoy high aggregate demand. So the monetary policy, or the link between the monetary policy and the aggregate demand, can be more explained in this figure. So in this figure, we have the monetary policy, and then sa kilid na ay transmission mechanism. So under sa akong report, we will tackle the other asset price effects. Ang kanin sa credit view, sa sunod ni na ako nga reporter, muna ni siya sa katong traditional interest rate effect, sa katong monetary policy, ato sa real interest rate, padung sa investment, mo ni siya ang kanang components sa kanang spending or ang GDP. So investments, then residential housing, consumer durable expenditure, padung na sila sa aggregate demand. Same goes with the exchange rate, which is ang monetary policy, padung ato sa monetary policy sa real interest rates to exchange rates, then ato sa net export sila to aggregate demand. Same sa Tobin-Skew monetary policy to stock prices, ja ato sa Tobin-Skew, ja which is ang investment. And then for wealth effects, we have monetary policy to stock prices, then financial wealth, which is ang consumption to aggregate demand gihapon sila. So next, we will tackle wealth effects. In the search for new monetary transmission mechanisms, since ang naadra man sa bond price is katong exchange rates sa net exports, and then ang katong stock prices, nangita sila og bagong monetary transmission mechanism. So ang researchers look sila at how consumers' balance sheets might affect their spending decisions. So si Franco Modigliani used his famous life cycle hypothesis of consumption. When we say consumption, this is the spending by consumers on non-durable goods and services. So different in consumption sa kanang customer or consumer expenditure in the way that it does not include spending on consumer durables. The basic premise of Modigliani's theory is that consumers smooth out their consumption time. Therefore, what determines consumption spending is the lifetime resources of consumers, not just today's income. So, ang mo-determine kuno sa consumption spending is ang lifetime resources sa mga consumers, not just today's income. So, an important component of consumers' lifetime resources is their financial wealth. So, katong ang giyon ganina nga, ang mo-determine sa consumption spending is ang lifetime resources sa consumers. Ang important component po sa consumers' lifetime resources is ang ijang financial wealth, wherein ang major part ingani is ang common stocks. When stock prices rise, the value of financial wealth increases, thereby increasing the lifetime resources of consumers, and consumption should also rise. So, kung ang stock prices kuno is mutaas, so mutaas ang financial wealth. So, mutaas ang financial wealth, it means that it would also increase the lifetime resources of the consumers, and of course, taas pod ang consumption. Considering that, as we have seen, ang monetary easing, so ang kaning monetary easing, mahitabo ni siya when ang central banks ilang i-lower ang federal funds rate to stimulate growth in the economy. So, kung nako ni monetary easing, it can lead to a rise in stock prices. We now have another monetary transmission mechanism, which is R down, katong ang kanang rate mo down, it means that the stock prices will rise. And then when the stock prices rise, it means that it will increase the value of the financial wealth of the consumers. And then if that happens, it increases the lifetime resources of the consumers as well as the consumption. So that means that the aggregate demand will also rise. The wealth and Tobin-Skew channels allow for a general definition of equity. So they can also be applied to the housing market where housing is equity. So ang wealth ug ang Tobin-Skew channels kunoning allow sila og a general definition of equity. So it doesn't mean that equity, it means only stock. So pwede po kuno ma-apply ang housing market or housing. Modigliani's research found this relationship to be an extremely powerful mechanism that adds substantially to the potency of monetary policy. So let's take into account the monetary transmission mechanism, which is katong R down to P up to wealth up, consumption up, and then Y up. So, diba, og naay monetary easing, it means that denoted by R down, which is ang rate is maubos kaya na may monetary easing, naay increase in house prices, which raises their prices relative to replacement cost, leads to a rise in Tobin-Skew for housing, thereby stimulating its production. So when that happens, when housing prices are rising, they are also an extremely important components of wealth, ang housing prices. So that means, kung mutaas gani ang housing prices, naapod si jay increase in wealth, thereby increasing consumption. So monetary expansion, which raises housing prices through the Tobin-Skew and wealth mechanisms, mulid siya o rise in aggregate demand, which is denoted by Y1. So, R down, kung naay monetary easing, mutaas ang housing prices. When that happens, mutaas pod ang wealth, thereby also raising the consumption and then raising the aggregate demand. And that would be all. Thank you.